He vanished from a high-security prison, using just bed sheets and a set of duplicate keys. What followed was a fugitive odyssey across Europe, for months in the wilderness, mafia showdowns, and a luxurious life financed by crime. But even the best escape plans have cracks. How did the infamous Gargano boss stay one step ahead of the law, and what mistake finally led to his capture? Marco Raduano's year on the run unfolded like a cinematic odyssey, marked by daring escapes, covert travels, near misses, and a well-organized support network stretching across multiple countries. It all began with a tense 3-day hideout in a basement, just after he pulled off an audacious prison break by scaling down the high-security walls using knotted bedsheets. From that moment, his fugitive journey took him through a labyrinth of safe houses, rugged mountain hideouts, and high-stakes encounters, culminating in his dramatic arrest at an upscale restaurant near Bastia, Corsica. For months, Raduano moved like a ghost across Italy and beyond, vanishing into the wild landscapes of Sardinia, where he survived in a makeshift tent for 4 months in the remote hills of Gallura. Yet, despite his exile, he couldn't sever ties with his criminal empire in Puglia. He returned to the Gargano countryside, his stronghold, where he personally settled a vendetta with bullets. His means of communication were as sophisticated as they were discreet. Encrypted phones sourced from trusted Calabrian associates kept him connected, while a vintage car provided an inconspicuous mode of transport for a strategic move towards Parma. His escape was more than a desperate flight. It was a calculated game of cat and mouse, blending old-school mafia tactics with cutting-edge technology. The investigation that unraveled his network exposed an intricate web of supporters who shielded him across Sardinia, Puglia, Spain, and Corsica. Law enforcement, through relentless pursuit, managed to dismantle his protection ring, leading to 21 arrests, 14 in Cagliari, 7 in Bari, ordered by the anti-mafia prosecutors. The investigation remains ongoing, with 58 individuals under scrutiny for their role in aiding one of Italy's most wanted criminals. The blueprint of his prison break was as audacious as it was cunning. Investigators, meticulously piecing together the details under the direction of prosecutors Rodolfo Sabella and Roberto Rossi, discovered that his escape wasn't a solo effort. Among his accomplices was a prison guard, Salvatore Deletta, a corrupt insider who had already been arrested and sentenced for smuggling phones into the penitentiary. Deletta had allegedly provided Raduano with a specially encrypted phone ahead of February 24th, ensuring he had the means to coordinate his next moves once outside. On the night of his escape, Raduano, known as Pallone, executed his plan with precision. Armed with a hook stolen from the prison workshop, he secured his makeshift rope of bedsheets and, with practiced efficiency, scaled down the imposing walls of Badu-e-Carros prison. His exit, however, wasn't merely a feat of agility. He also possessed duplicate keys to crucial parts of the facility, further easing his path to freedom. Marco Raduano's meticulously planned escape from prison encountered an immediate setback the moment he set foot outside the facility. According to investigators, he was supposed to be met by an accomplice who would facilitate his swift departure from the area, but the contact never arrived. It is believed that the unexpected presence of law enforcement in the vicinity may have deterred the would-be rescuer, leaving Raduano stranded and vulnerable. With no alternative plan in place, he had no choice but to seek refuge in the first available hiding spot, a cramped, musty cellar beneath a house in Nuoro. For 3 agonizing days, he remained in near-total isolation, with only the sound of passing footsteps above him serving as a reminder of the risk that loomed outside. His movements were severely restricted, and the lack of external support forced him into a state of anxious waiting, unsure whether his entire plan had already begun to unravel. Salvation finally arrived in the form of a Venetian associate who managed to reach him undetected and provide the means for his escape from the immediate danger zone. Once safely extracted from Nuoro, Raduano continued his evasive maneuvers, spending the next phase of his fugitive life in the desolate countryside of Bidi, a rural area in central Sardinia. He avoided any form of communication that could compromise his location and refrained from making unnecessary movements, relying instead on his contacts to supply him with basic necessities. After a short stay in Bidi, he pushed further north, traveling approximately 60 kilometers to reach the rugged, uninhabited terrain of Padru, in the heart of Gallura. This remote and inhospitable region offered the perfect concealment, and for 4 months, he lived in near total seclusion, residing in a tent hidden deep within the wilderness. The isolation, while extreme, was a necessary precaution. Law enforcement was aggressively pursuing any leads related to his whereabouts, and he knew that any careless move could bring his escape to a premature end. By June of the previous year, Raduano decided it was time to leave Sardinia behind. The island, once a sanctuary, had become a liability as the authorities tightened their grip. His next move was an intricate relocation to Corsica, a temporary refuge that provided a buffer before the next stage of his journey. But his time there was short-lived. He soon orchestrated another covert transfer, this time venturing into Spain. He resurfaced in the Granada region, where he was accompanied by his trusted right-hand man, Gianluigi Troiano, another fugitive on the run. The two criminals maintained a low profile, operating within a secure network of underworld contacts who facilitated their movements. However, this relative calm did not last long. A decisive blow to their operations came when Troiano was apprehended just days before Raduano himself would meet his downfall. The arrest of his closest allies sent shockwaves through Raduano's carefully laid plans, forcing him to once again uproot his existence and flee back to Corsica in a desperate attempt to stay ahead of law enforcement. The relentless pursuit of Marco Raduano and his vast support network had long been underway. Multiple elite law enforcement units, including the Carabinieri Special Operations Group, ROS, the Mobile Squad of Nuoro, the Central Operations Service, SCO, and specialized investigative units in Cagliari and Venice had systematically closed in on those who provided him with protection, resources, and logistical aid. Despite Raduano's elaborate efforts to remain undetectable, weaving a web of deception and high-tech safeguards, investigators gradually untangled the intricate connections sustaining his life on the run. The arrest warrant issued by Judge Gabriella Pidi of the Bari Court detailed the complex network of accomplices, key figures in the Foggia underworld, including Michele Galla, Antonio Germinelli, Michele Murgo, Danilo Notarangelo, and Marco Rinaldi. Each played a critical role either by providing safe houses, funneling drug money to finance his survival, or facilitating communications through secure channels. Their loyalty came at a cost, with Raduano sparing no expense in his efforts to stay ahead of the authorities. Communication was his lifeline, and he relied exclusively on encrypted mobile phones, at least 7 in total, acquired from trusted Calabrian sources. These highly secure devices, each valued at around €1,500, ensured that his exchanges with criminal associates remained impenetrable to law enforcement. Every call, every message was cloaked in secrecy, making it nearly impossible to track him directly. Yet, as meticulous as he was, cracks inevitably formed. Surveillance on his relatives proved to be an unexpected goldmine for investigators. Unlike Raduano, who operated with military-grade caution, some of his family members were less careful. Conversations between them provided hints, indirect clues that gradually pieced together fragments of his movements. Though the fugitive himself never exposed his location or plans outright, his need for emotional ties, his desire to maintain some connection with his son and other close relatives, gave investigators a crucial edge. Bit by bit, they began to map his trajectory. Confidence bred recklessness, and Raduano's sense of security eventually led him to take a bold risk. Convinced that he remained untouchable, he dared to return to his hometown of Vieste in the fall of the previous year, slipping back into the very territory where his criminal empire had thrived. He was not there for nostalgia. His visit was one of violence and retribution. On October 16th, alongside his loyal enforcer Gianluigi Troiano, he embarked on a mission of death. Their target, Gennaro Cariglia. The plan was carefully laid out, and they traveled in a car with Polish license plates, ensuring that their movements would not immediately raise suspicion. As they closed in on their intended victim, ready to strike, fate intervened. The assassination attempt failed, the execution botched. With no time to waste, the two criminals immediately abandoned their mission and disappeared into the countryside, taking refuge in an isolated farmhouse. They knew staying in Viest any longer would be suicidal. Law enforcement would soon be on high alert. Before authorities could react, they orchestrated yet another vanishing act. A vintage car served as their next getaway vehicle, a calculated choice that allowed them to blend in without drawing attention. From Viest, they made their way north to Parma, carefully navigating the roads to avoid detection. It was only a temporary stop. Once their immediate trail had gone cold, they slipped out of Italy once more, vanishing beyond the country's borders, certain that they had once again managed to evade capture. By late November 2023, Marco Raduano and his trusted lieutenant, Gianluigi Troiano, had once again settled into Corsica, the island that had become both a refuge and a ticking time bomb for the fugitive boss. Despite the relative safety of his hideout, nostalgia gnawed at him. The pull of home, its flavors, its comforts, was undeniable. To soothe his longing, he arranged for the delivery of packages filled with traditional delicacies from the Gargano region, including fine wines and local specialties. This seemingly innocuous act, driven by sentiment, would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. Law enforcement had been meticulously piecing together every scrap of information, hunting for any lead that might reveal his whereabouts. The arrival of these packages did not go unnoticed. Investigators, who had been mapping the flow of goods and people between Corsica and Italy, quickly recognized the shipments as more than just an indulgence. They were a breadcrumb trail leading straight to their target. The movement of parcels between Corsica and the Gargano Peninsula was far from a one-time occurrence. Authorities discovered a pattern, multiple shipments, some of which were routed through Venice before reaching their final destinations. Investigators suspected that this logistical route was no accident. It was in Venice that Raduano maintained a valuable connection, Marco Rinaldi, a loyal associate with the resources and influence to facilitate his needs. The 2-month countdown to his downfall had already begun. As Christmas approached, Raduano's role as a recipient of goods shifted. No longer content with simply receiving comforts from home, he took on the role of sender. Before the holiday season, he orchestrated the shipment of several packages back to Italy, but their contents were far from sentimental gifts. Instead of homemade foods or personal belongings, the boxes were filled with luxury clothing and accessories, designer items looted from a warehouse in Luciana, Corsica. Raduano and Troiano had executed the theft with precision, loading 10 large sacks with high-end apparel from prestigious fashion brands. This act of indulgence, an unnecessary risk fueled by arrogance and an assumed sense of invincibility, would only serve to tighten the noose around them. Despite the growing pressure from law enforcement, Raduano still had unfinished business. He made yet another trip to Spain, weaving between safe locations, avoiding direct confrontation, and making careful moves to stay ahead of his pursuers. But the arrest of his right-hand man, Troiano, forced an urgent recalibration of his plans. He returned once again to Corsica, unknowingly stepping closer to the moment when his freedom would be permanently stripped away. The investigation had reached a boiling point. The net was closing in, and all attention now centered on the area around Bastia, particularly a location near the airport. Authorities had zeroed in on a greenhouse owned by a French national with well-documented ties to organized crime. This business, an unassuming front, turned out to be a key element in Raduano's downfall. It was here that a crucial player in his capture emerged, a woman named Chloe, an employee at the greenhouse who had unknowingly become the linchpin of the entire operation. Surveillance teams had been monitoring her movements, knowing that she would inevitably lead them to their true target. On the evening of February 1st, as the clock neared 6 p.m., Chloe arrived at a parking lot near the Utspertinu restaurant in Illyria. She was unaware that her every move was being tracked, her presence the final piece of the puzzle. Exactly an hour later, Raduano arrived to meet her, moving with the same confidence that had kept him ahead of law enforcement for so long. But this time, his luck had run out. Hidden in the shadows, the men of ROS, Raggruppamento Operativo Speciale, waited, their patience finally rewarded. The moment he stepped into the open, the operation snapped shut like a steel trap. His escape had reached its final chapter. In an instant, the hunt that had spanned continents, involved countless resources, and pushed law enforcement to its limits, came to an unceremonious end. His hands were wrenched behind his back, cold metal snapped around his wrists, and in that moment, the life of the fugitive boss, once untouchable, was reduced to nothing more than a prisoner caught at last.